Welcome to Current Issues in Athletic Administration. Today we are being joined by Michelle Noeth, Athletic Director at Los Altos High School, my colleague and friend from the Central Coast section. She's also our CCS ADA President and a CSADA Vice President, and probably a whole bunch of other titles like Woody Harrelson got back in the day on Cheers. But Coach, thanks for joining today. If you give us a little background here on your resume and how you got to where you are before we dive into the issues at hand.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. And it's nice to be back on your podcast again. It's always fun to reconnect, and it'll be exciting to hear what other people have to say later on. Just real quick, I started off running cross country and track in high school. Loved it so much. Ran cross country track in college and was inspired by my coach to become a coach. So I coached cross country and track at Arroyo, Terra Nova, Pittsburgh High School, and then took on athletic director role at Terra Nova and skipped over to Los Altos and became an athletic director there. Did very little coaching at Los Altos. It's more of just stepping into the coaching role when absolutely necessary. But other than that, you summed it up. Took on CCS ADA president, which has been really awesome to connect with other athletic directors and hearing some of the stuff that they're interested in and things that the resources that they need. So we've been doing a new AD workshop in the summers for people who have just gotten hired to be a athletic director. So we call it the Rookie AD workshop. So that's been a lot of fun as the CCS ADA president helping out with. And then with that role, stepped on as a VP on the CSADA board. And that's been really cool to, again, take resources that ADs are looking for and capitalizing on that. And yeah, it's been fun.
All right. So here we go. For those of you that are listening, we said to be back on the podcast. So Michelle's been a guest on my other show, which is called the Context Coaching Podcast, where we dive into different approaches to coaching and what people have learned throughout their career. Essentially, it's a digital database of mentorship. If you want to check that out, this is the new show, which focuses on issues that athletic directors are facing, primarily, I don't want to say today, but in the most recent history or the things you're looking forward to for the next year. And so we're framing this around that. And Michelle, the opening salvo of this show to, I think, zero in on what is the thing that is creating the most significant challenges for you at your site right now would be Anthony's opening question at many of his meetings. What weighs most heavily on your mind right now from a professional standpoint?
I would say coaches and retaining the coaches. Los Altos is considered a very influential neighborhood, and yet trying to recruit coaches has just been a challenge. We are one of the highest paying districts when you look at coaching stipends, and yet it's very difficult to get people to apply, and those that do apply, they're very new at coaching. And so I feel like we've been giving a lot of people an opportunity to grow as coaches. And then within a year or two, if they're a younger coach, they end up going back to college or they end up moving somewhere else because of a different job opportunity. And then if they're an older coach, some of them retire and they decide to go do other things. And if they're in that mid range of their coaching career, either they're looking for the next opportunity or they're having families and they need to step out because they need to either have a kid or take care of kids. And so it's been a challenge just to hold on to coaches. And it doesn't matter, I've found, what sport it is, whether it be football, basketball, that soccer, that it's just hard to keep them. And then when you're hiring somebody, hoping that this person's going to stick around.
Great topic. Great starting place. So let's go here. What is your current approach to finding, hiring, onboarding coaches, right? What's worked? What hasn't? What are you trying that's new?
If we start with the first, trying to find coaches, because that's the starting point, is you got to find them first, is I'll put it on our social media, it's on our athletic website, send an email to the staff, we put it in the local newspaper. And then I also try to utilize my coaches and say, hey, I'm looking for a wrestling coach. Do you know anybody that might be interested? I've utilized my student athletes because sometimes they know of club or they know of neighbors or their parents know people that have coached in the past that might be interested. And that's one of the techniques that we've utilized. And then I also reach out to my other athletic directors and say, hey, I'm looking for a wrestling coach. If you know of anybody who might be a good candidate, please send them my way. I've posted on our league website. I've posted on the CCS website. Just recently, I realized Indeed, there's a cost associated. And so either that one I haven't yet done because I want to work with the district to find out if they'll pick up that cost, or is that something that our site would have to pick up? But those are just some of the ways of just a starting off point of here's publicizing the position. And if people go to that page on our website, it will say open, but then I have the link to EdJoin. So we have it posted on EdJoin. And so there's so many different ways to publicize it. And then we've still struggled to sometimes fill the position where we'll have a coach that ends up having to coach both levels, varsity and JV, depending on the sport. So that would be the first part, is just the publication, and utilizing the resources. The onboarding, that can be a little time consuming because of all of the certificates that we now require and ask our coaches to have. And a lot of them don't realize how much they have to have before they can just even step onto a field and coach our athletes. And so a lot of times we'll run into the feeling that they're doing us a favor by even applying for the position. And when asked to do all these documents and you got to get cleared, you got to get fingerprinted, you got to do the sudden cardiac, you got to do the heat illness. Again, the type of personalities you get that apply for the positions, sometimes you're trying to explain to them things have changed since the last time you've coached, or hey, this is what you need to do if as a new coach, if doesn't matter what school in California.
Yep. Let's go back to the finding first of all. And in your list of things, here's what I traditionally do. When you've
Yep.
reached out to other ADs, what suggestions, what things have they shared that maybe you've tried and found success with, if any?
I would say honestly, it's reaching out to the other ADs. That is really one of the things. And then the other thing that I've found success is our parents, utilizing our parents. They know people that have coached their kids before, or they know people that might be interested. And I feel like when we have parents that help step in and help us find coaches, a little bit of that gives that coach some validity that, okay, I know you're not going to piss off that parent because they were cheering for you. They were rooting for you to get the job here. And so I have found that our more passionate parents have more connections because they've just been so involved with the sports that they know when there's a club coach that's interested in coaching at the high school, or they know a club coach that will do them a favor and maybe apply for the position. Especially when we're very skim. It's very rare that we'll have like 10 applicants to choose from.
I'm going to put you on the spot and feel free to deflect if needed.
Sure.
Given where you're located, and for listeners who are not familiar with the area, Michelle's school is sitting right in the Silicon Valley, right next to Stanford, Menlo College. I'm sure I'm missing some, Foothill, Kenyatta as junior colleges, but what, if any, attempts have you made to reach out to those university athletic departments and tap in and ask if they have any recent graduates, if they have anybody that is looking for the next phase of their life that potentially wants to get their foot in the door?
I have not reached out directly to the community colleges, the local ones, not to deflect, but I'm going to be very straightforward, is I'm a little reluctant. And the reason being, and this may go against what a lot of your listeners might feel, is that then I know they're only temporary, that I know that depending on who we get, if they're not secure in a job if they're not secure where they're living situation, then I know they might be there for a season, maybe two. We've had that happen where when I first got there, we had a couple of people that were just, they were going to college, so they were local. And this is what the AD prior to me, she was able to capture a couple of what you're referring to of community college or coaches. And they decided that they wanted to transfer to a different college. And so then you're scrambling again to find a coach. So I feel like that's a temporary fix, not a longevity. And when I'm looking for a head coach for a varsity program, I'm looking for longevity because consistency in the program is beneficial for our student athletes.
100%. And I am going to agree and disagree at the same time. And I'm going to use the scenario that we had here because, right, in your unique situation, given the cost of living in Los Altos, all these other variables that may or may not apply to whoever's listening. I had a similar position when my old assistant and I were talking about reaching out to the Naval Postgraduate School, which is located here in Monterey. And I was like, they're only here for a year or 2 years. I don't necessarily want to bring them in and then they leave. And his response was, when he was a student, those were some of the coaches that had the greatest impact on him. And I was like, okay, if that's your response, let me dig into this. And we've had a pipeline of military officers coming through and spending a year to 3 years with us, even though they weren't necessarily going to be long time, primarily in assistant roles, but a value add, right? So you got Moffett Field there near you, right? You've got something over the hill on the coast. If you're in Northern California, you have a bunch of bases and obviously in different areas. And then in your case, if you look at Stanford or the USF or these schools that are a little north or San Jose State that are a little south, right? How can maybe you, I don't know what the hiring is like for teachers at Los Altos, but other schools that may be for teachers, right? How are you partnering with the athletic departments at those schools to identify athletes who are going into the teaching credentialing program and getting them early on a trajectory to come into your school at the early level of teaching, right? And again, it might not work for you, Michelle, but that's something that I've been able, like my biggest feeder of coaches is Cal State Monterey, which is a super small university. But I look at it from your lens is, yeah, they're here only short time and they've figured out how to be living there for the last 4 years. Can you get them a couple of years and maybe they end up on your faculty? Maybe they don't, but it gives you a little bit of air cover as you try to navigate those tougher to fill jobs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it could be another avenue to look into, and I'm not opposed to it. And I would say the next step is there's the theory of it, there's the idea of it, and then there's the actual, okay, what's the approach? Are you sending those people an email as an introductory of, hey, I'm so and so, we're looking for coaches? And I can say that I have reached out to local community colleges when we were trying to find a fill in for our athletic trainer. So when we were, so I would say I did do that approach for the athletic trainer as a sub, but not looking at it from like a trying to recruit coaches aspect. And I could tell you again, so going back just to that approach, do you email them or are you now knocking on their office door to get 5 minutes of their time? Because we all know as athletic directors, when we look at our emails, we look at it as, okay, is this something that needs to be taken care of right now? And if not, then it gets shoved aside and then may not necessarily be at your priority list to go back to. And then it gets deeper and deeper in your emails. And I guess the next thing would be, what would be the best approach? In person, making phone calls, emails, and what do we have time for? Because when you're going after school to go supervise all these games, then are you utilizing your summer to do that? But summer, you're trying to spend time with your family and friends. And at the same time, they are also using their summer with their family and friends. So then it's when is that approach the best timing?
Yeah, and I think that's unique to the individual. I think if you're asking me those questions and I'm going to answer from my standpoint, your network is your net worth. And ultimately, my ability to reach out and continuously build relationships with people in my space has then allowed for me to be a go-to person for our administration when they're like, hey, this job, we need to find and hire this job. Who do you have? Hold on. And so now you get a chance to get more faculty coaches on board. I would do it this way, right, Michelle? If I reached out to you and said, hey, do you have a half hour to grab something to drink and talk to me about something I'm wrestling with at my site level? You would say yes. And ultimately, we'd figure it out in our schedule, be it on a weekend, be it during the summer, be it during a break. And the same thing goes for what do? It's, hey, I'm reaching out to the athletic department at Stanford and I'm saying, hey, I'm the athletic director of Los Altos. I would love to pick your brain on a few things and just figure out how you guys do things. And then I'm utilizing that introduction to start building a relationship so those people are on your speed dial. And again, depends on your area, right? If you're in Santa Cruz, right, UC Santa Cruz is right there. If you are in San Francisco, there's a bunch of different places. So your situation's unique and you got to figure out what works for you. But I think the more you are having those networking relationships where maybe they need high school kids to volunteer at events and you guys are having a back and forth all the time, then it's you become the person on the speed dial versus your neighboring school that's reaching out and having that relationship. So I think it all depends, right? Time is your only non-renewable resource. How do you want to use that? And I think for me, I've found that every time I travel, I'm stopping at high schools and universities to network so that you never know when you're going to need to make it a withdrawal from a relationship that you've made a bunch of deposits in. So I think that would be my answer to that. Pivoting to the other part of this with you as the section VP, what would you say are the issues that are coming up in our section that you think are unique to us, but also maybe similar to what's going on throughout the rest of the state, right? Because that's part of this as well. Like, here's CCS, VP, here's what's going on in our section, and people in Southern California may want to know about it. What do you have in regards to that and what we're currently dealing with in our section?
I would think one of the things that is coming up is we are introducing girls flag football. This will be, I think, the second year, and it's picking up momentum with adding more schools. I know from our league, we're part of SCVAL. We are officially making it a league sport this upcoming school year. And so that's going to be new for us, but that's also going to be adding more teams to the section. And one of the concerns is how is that going to start impacting the other female fall sports, especially some schools like ours, we have field hockey. And already some of our kids are now they're like, do I do field hockey? Do I do girls flag football? And one of them, I promised the coach I was gonna do field hockey, and it's her senior year, so she doesn't want to let the coach down, but yet she really wants to do flag football. And so now it's her senior year, and we're starting to challenge some of our athletes to make really difficult situation decisions. Do you stay committed to a coach, knowing that you're not going to play that in college? You're not going to play that sport in college. So now you're just sticking around because of the coach, as opposed to doing a sport that you want to dip your toes into the water. And now there's going to be more opportunities at the collegiate level for girls flag football. And that could be an opportunity where they might go to a community college and say, yeah, I played 1 year in high school, but I really enjoyed it. So now I'm going to try out for the collegiate team, and that could put them on a whole nother pathway. So I would say that's one of those issues, that concerns that have been brought up numerous times in meetings, is the introduction of another sport and all of the resources that go into it, field space time. Another concern issue, and this is throughout the entire state, is, and it's like beating a dead horse on this one, is the refs.
Yeah, let's pause on that. Let's pause on that because Warren talked about that on his episode. So
All right, so
I
I'm
want
gonna
to
bring
go
that one
back,
up.
but I want to go back to what you just said because I think this is super interesting and important in the way in which you framed it. So introducing a new sport, specifically flag football,
For
which,
females.
oh yeah, which seems to be the new hot, attractive deal. Okay, so what specific issues have you run into at your site and how are you navigating those? That's question one. Question two is, what are your league mates sharing and how they're navigating those challenges that you are facing?
I would say one of the first ones is what I touched upon earlier in the show was coaches, is finding a coach for this new sport that we have. As soon as we said we were going to do this as a league, we posted the position online and I got 2 applicants for the position. One of them, I was like, hey, let's set up a meeting next week. And before that next week happened, they already took the position somewhere else, which is fine. It is what it is. And then the other person was somebody that had little to no coaching experience with the sport. And so I wanted to hold off just a little bit longer. And it ended up that one of my coworkers, one of my teachers, who's also my baseball coach, stepped in and he's going to take on the role this upcoming season. So I'm super grateful for that. And he does have football coaching experience. So it's nice that he knows the drills, he knows our section, he knows our league and all that kind of stuff. But within our league, the conversation has been finding coaches. And then the other one is finding space because some of us are very tight with our field space. And so now it's for me, it's managing field hockey, girls flag football, band, and football. And there's other conversations that we can have offline. But so then it's trying to figure out that scheduling. And since almost everybody's an off campus coach, then how do you determine you go at 6 o'clock, you go at this time, you go at this time when you're trying to keep all these coaches?
Let me ask this, and I want to move on to something else. If you could give me your best concise answer on this one, how do you, at your site, and then your colleagues within the league, how are you making decisions on whether or not to field flag football, knowing it's going to impact field hockey, knowing it's going to impact maybe water polo if you have that at your site? But these choices about where am I pushing my chips in and where are we deciding to create an opportunity versus potentially maybe saying no. And just really, what's the thought process on that? How did you land where you did? And what are other people doing? Because that's a tough thing to navigate.
We have some people that are very gun ho for having another sport. And for us, our board of managers ultimately make that decision. And so even if you personally, as an athletic director, are maybe not wanting to have this sport, you ultimately get superseded by your principal and the board of managers saying, nope, we're gonna go ahead and pass this along. And so there's people above us that kind of also get to make some decisions that we as ADs end up implementing. The board decided if there's going to be supervision and what does that look like and are we going to be charging, and so they're making decisions that we now have to implement because that is our role and our position.
So basically, what you're saying is the league dictated that everyone needs to field flag football.
Or at least, yeah, or for the most part, raise your hand if you think you're going to have a team kind of thing. And but everybody in the room knew that even if we don't want it, it's still going to get pushed by the parents and the athletes to have it. And then Title IX and everything else under the sun.
Yeah, that's the issue, right? And for me, it's one of these things where at the site level, you have to decide what is sustainable from a resource standpoint, right? Time, money, facility, etc. So we don't have wrestling, we don't have boys volleyball. We've piloted them, not sustainable, right? Flag football, it's okay, here's this deal. Are you going to do it? It's like right now, no. I don't have a demand for it, right? I haven't had that push. Once I do, I got a tougher decision to make. But right now I don't have that. And I have field hockey and I don't want to kill that program. And until I have a demand, I'm not going to introduce something just because it's a whim for me. But ultimately, every school is different. And what is your constituency asking for? And I think that's where you have to listen in. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. All right. A couple more questions. Shorter version of the pod than the other coaching one. What would you say in regards to the issues that are consuming most of your bandwidth right now? And it might not be what weighs most heavily on your mind, but on a regular basis, this is what's consuming all of my bandwidth, even if I'm not choosing for that to consume my bandwidth.
I would say working with administration and figuring out some best practices and realizing that we all have a lot of things, a lot of events that we have to supervise, and communication. So the bandwidth of having more clear communication about expectations of not only my role, but if there's going to be changes in how things are communicated, how events are going to be organized or approved, that I would say, especially this past year, that was a lot of my bandwidth is just every month there was just a new change that I had to learn and figure out, but then communicate that to my coaches. And so I would say the most time bandwidth consuming thing is change. And I get change happens, and we as human beings can adapt and overcome. And I think as athletic directors, a lot of times it depends on what those changes are that can become time consuming and eat up your time when you could be working on something else, either professional development wise or being a little more supportive of a sport when you're dealing with explaining changes and why these things are happening. I would say has been a very bandwidth time consuming thing without going into too specifics, but I'm pretty sure everybody out there can understand change and the nuances of it.
Yeah, and I think I'll add this just as a takeaway, right? If that is what is consuming most of your bandwidth, and substitute X for what Michelle just said, right? Administration and communication and trying to figure out how to best utilize the back and forth, right? Whatever you substitute there, if we can figure out a way to be more efficient at that and claw some of our time and bandwidth back, right? It allows us to put more energy into the things that are important versus just what's urgent, right? And I think so. How are you hacking those things that are getting in the way of our productivity? And I think that's the question we all want to ask ourselves as we try to navigate these issues that come up on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. Okay, one of the questions I've been asking is if you could pin down another athletic director, what would you want to ask them? Maybe to solve something that you're dealing with. And while you think about what that might be, I'm now asking the question from the previous guest to the next guest. What Eddie wanted to know about was what's your involvement with your lower level coaches and how are you mentoring and bringing them along?
Okay. So my involvement with my lower level coaches, I would feel is pretty good. I include them on my email exchanges that I have with my head coaches. I do go to their events. So I do go to their games and I do walk up to them and check in with them saying, "Hey, do you need anything? Are you good? Or are you having problems with something?" And there's been opportunities where we've had thoughtful conversations about a situation they're having with their student athlete or a parent. If they have to set up a meeting with one of the parents, I tell them, "Hey, I will make myself available. Just let me know when so that I can be supportive of them during that meeting." And then after the meeting, either I'll regroup and go over what was said in the meeting, or if I notice there's something that they could be doing better on, I'll pull them aside and give them some suggestions. I know it's one of my coaches. I suggested taking a couple of coaching courses on NFHS Learn to help with their interactions with their student athletes and suggest, hey, why don't you have them take the captain's course to really show them that you're beyond just the X's and O's, but teaching them something outside. So I would say that I do try to make some time because I look at my lower level coaches as my future head coaches. That if my head coach steps away, okay, would I hire this person to be the next head coach? And what are things that I can do to help navigate? And if not, then they're not ready, then at least I know they're good at that level. And I know where they can improve on and give them some suggestions there.
Yeah. And I believe that's really what he's getting at. It's okay, how are we meant programmatically, right? Systematically, how are we evaluating the rest of the coaches on our staff that aren't necessarily the head coach? So that what you just said, I think, is the key. Are they going to be ready to step in when you have an inevitable departure? And I think the way in which you frame that's a great starting place. But I think what Eddie was getting at, it's becoming more prevalent that it's an area that needs to be addressed and you need to have your finger on the pulse of it. So back to your chance now to put a question out there that you want an answer to. If you had a captive audience and you could ask something, what would it be?
What do people actually do in a typical day that at the end they felt like they accomplished something and they felt good about?
That's a great question and a great cliffhanger and a place to sit, because I think what you're getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when you're teaching classes, right? You have your periods, whatever, you get through a day, you know what lesson you've delivered, right? You can put a pin in it, you can assess, you can evaluate. When you are coaching a practice, you have a similar thing. But when you are in an administrative role, be it school administration, be it middle management and athletic administration, you may have some things on your calendar, but your day's constantly getting hijacked and your to-do list is not, it's very fluid, right? It's not as cut and dry as you might want it to be. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, but so there's some ADs that are still coaching. There's still some that are still teaching, and then you have some that are full time. So you have ADs that are in three different prongs. And at the end of the day, there's so many different things that are happening that what is it something that at the end of the day that they feel good that they accomplished or they took that they feel fulfilled?
No, I love that. And we're going to get an answer to that on the next episode. So, Coach, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on. Been super helpful. A lot of good things to think about here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.